My name is Paul Shelley, and welcome to The AstroHistorian. This is a channel dedicated to exploring and explaining the lore of sci-fi and space universes and discussing their impact. Today we'll be talking about one of the most important events of human history in the Star Citizen universe, one that nearly ended in disaster: First Contact. Before I get into that, I want to thank y'all for your continued support. We just crossed over 24,000 subs and are still rising, and that has everything to do with you watching right now. So if you've been enjoying the videos, be sure to hit the like button, and if you haven't already subscribed, then be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to stay up to date on the latest videos. If you want to go that extra mile, we also have YouTube memberships and Ko-fi for financial donations. Lastly, if you want early, ad-free access to these videos, consider joining the Patreon as well. All those links are in the description. Now let's talk about how one of the most important events in human history nearly ended up being the first interstellar war in human history, and how that shaped human civilization since. To start, we're going to need some background on what was going on before First Contact. Humans had been exploring distant stars for over 150 years, had formed the first unified human government, the United Nations of Earth, and fought a war to keep that government in power, the Unification Wars. So humanity had been in the business of interstellar exploration, governance, and conflict for some time. However, it's important to note that humanity's expansion, though widespread at this point in history, was not the same kind of expansion we see today. Most of the systems humanity had settled by that time hadn't even fully terraformed their worlds. Thus, the populations of these places were often little more than scattered outposts, small clusters of habs which served as landing zones for those companies working to terraform those worlds, or, at best, small towns and cities which were slowly growing post-terraformation. All this meant that even a century and a half after the first jump point was discovered, the vast majority of what made up human civilization was still firmly rooted in the Sol system, and mostly on Earth. As a result, the nascent UNE was still having issues with expanding its reach beyond Sol and the few settled systems that existed like Croshaw and Redder. Because of the lack of population and limited return on investment, very few UNE military forces were sent to the edge of human space, and thus very few of the UNE laws could be effectively enforced. Thus, the main law and order of these remote systems came from local law enforcement and/or militia. This meant that frontier systems were very lawless in every sense of the word. Most of the kind of people who lived and worked in the frontier were very well armed out of pure necessity. We don't know exactly how hard it was to get weapons for your various ships as a civilian, but we know that regardless of difficulty, those on the edge of space managed to be armed in some way, shape, or form. These weapons were primitive by 30th century standards. The most advanced weapon systems were still laser weaponry, beams that took time to slice through opposing ships' armor, and thus required a constant lock and trace on those ships. These weapons were also very power-hungry, so much so that it was likely that only large defense stations with massive power plants could effectively use them. We do know that missiles and ballistic cannons were also used, and likely more common among both civilian and military ships. In contrast to humanity, the species we would make first contact with, the Banu, seem to be even less unified, but far more connected to one another culturally. Banu culture is not as united as other cultures, which now dominate the galaxy. Even the divided Vanduul are known to pull together under a single leader when an effective one emerges. The Banu have always, and likely will always, find this idea alien. Their basic unit of organization is known as the Suli, part trade guild, part family. These groups are of every size and cover every part of their society. There are Sulis for everything from politics, bureaucracy, building, trade, protection, and so on. So rather than one big society, the Banu have small Sulis that weave throughout the society to ensure everything gets done. For instance, while it isn't explicit, it's likely that political Sulis will charge something of a tax to other Sulis in order to deal with groups who are outside of the planet, flotilla, or other location they are present. Another example would be a shipbuilding Suli who has to work with other Sulis to supply them with materials to build the ships that they would then sell to other Sulis who need those ships to function. However, Outside the wealth of a specific Suli, there's no real power invested in anything like a central government. Groups of Sulis will decide the rules and laws which govern them as a whole only as a means to ensure minimal friction for the operation of each Suli. If Sulis are the basic structure of Banu society, then contracts are the glue holding that structure together. Everything is negotiated in Banu society. Even childbirth and rearing the young is done under contract. The Banu are quite literally raised in a system under contract, often where a lump sum is paid up front in return for labor, which will be used to pay off that debt for a specific period of time. This has made the Banu very focused on being skilled at their craft. Those who are the best at what they do can get out of their contracts early, and even earn enough money to form their own Sulis, and become what are known as Esso-Sulis, which are the founders and leaders of any given Suli. Those who don't have the skills may turn to other means to shorten their stay as long as they don't get caught. This drive for improvement, coupled with a bit of a disdain for useless frivolities, has led to the species never keeping histories and only making the best products they can, or at least look like the best products they can, in order to keep up with their competition. This leads to Banu ships being some of the most eccentric and advanced ships in the galaxy, as they take any advancement they can use to get an edge in whatever job they are doing. While the Banu work in this interconnected web of Sulis, there's a central government of sorts that the Banu call the Protectorate. This is run by an annual council of political Sulis who gather on Bacchus II called the Gathering. It's there that major decisions are made that affect all Banu. Interplanetary treaties, changes in policy when dealing with non-Banu, airing of grievances, and even assessing the value of their common currency. While these decisions aren't binding, they are best respected by all Suli, because not doing so might ostracize them from valuable trade partners in the future. Now that we understand the background of what's going on, we need to understand the players involved in this event. General Neil Sokovich, the nav-jumper Vernon Tarr, and an ambitious bureaucrat who's become known as Jerry. Neil Sokovich was born on the planet of Angeli in the Croshaw system in 2373. He was one of the first generations to have been born and raised on a terraformed Angeli, the first generations of humans to have been born under the light of another star. When he was 7, he was witness to the unification wars raging in the Sol system after the formation of the UNE. We don't know if this played a part in his ultimate decision. It did seem to impact the child who, at the young age of 17 in 2390, joined the UNE army. He was a natural leader and rose through the ranks to become an officer in the new post-unification military. He was promoted to the rank of general in 2415 at the age of 42, after 2 deployments into the restricted Banshee system, where he gained a reputation for his ability to settle conflicts with outlaws illegally living in the system without opening fire. He was seen as a master of negotiation and was the right kind of officer to lead the frontier forces in locations far from major supply routes and easy reinforcements. This would eventually lead him to be stationed in the newly discovered Davian system in 2430. Where he may have worked with the famous Marshal Cathcart, a law enforcement officer in Davian, who is credited to be the namesake of the Cathcart system. There he remained for 8 years, looking after the remote backwater, likely dealing with any issues with his well-known negotiation skills. In 2438, Vernon Tarr was exploring an area of space in the newly discovered system, for what he was sure was a new jump point. Like in the 30th century, the discovery of a jump point is exceedingly rare and comes with it great profit and prestige. It was that very fact that had Tarr on edge. He was afraid that he might have been shadowed by rivals, looking to follow him to his find only to ambush and kill him before claiming it for themselves. While there's no evidence of this happening in the past, there is a case of Ashley Gone, who supposedly was evading pirates in the Null system in 2341 when she blindly quantum jumped, only to find the telltale signatures of a jump point. She immediately turned her find into the UNE, named the system after her father, and then vanished. Afterwards, it was discovered that the system had an abandoned human settlement on one of the moons, which threw her discovery claim into question. While we're not sure this was specifically the case, It may have been theorized that she killed the original discoverer and claimed it for her own as a means to cash in on the find. Couple that with the lawlessness of border systems like Davian, and it isn't hard to understand why the old explorer was nervous. Meanwhile, in Banu space, there was a middle-aged, desk-bound Banu bureaucrat who'd grown tired of their position. Their name was Njeri, and they had ambitions of becoming a pilot. To that end, they had been using their position to embezzle funds to buy himself out of his contract and into a respected exploration Suli. However, one day their Esso Suli uncovered the scheme, and Njeri panicked, stealing one of the Suli's ships, what we know today as a Defender, and fled. This resulted in a multi-day, multi-system chase that eventually, through sheer luck and some innate skill, led them through an unknown jump point into the Davian system on June 12, 2438. The same jump point that Vernon Tarr was in hot pursuit of. At 013 Standard Earth Time, modern Eastern Standard Time, Tarr saw a ship on his sensors. In the moment, he panicked, thinking it was another explorer out to cut in on his find, and fired a shot from his ship's weapons. The hasty shot went wide and missed the ship entirely, and before he fired another round, he realized what he was looking at was no ship he had ever seen. A design entirely alien. While he was realizing that he was staring at a ship from an alien civilization, the other ship just stopped. You see, the alien ship was the Defender, piloted by Njeri, who likely was processing the same realization. As a result, both ships maintained their position, just staring at one another in disbelief. It was Tarr who would act first, notifying the local UNE forces of his discovery, bringing General Sokovich into the situation. The general left their base with a small naval force to rendezvous with Tarr. There they brought the still motionless Defender onto one of the ships. The crew of this Navy vessel became the first humans to ever look upon a sapient alien being, who was apparently very affable to their presence. Njeri tried to work with the various scientists and military officials to bridge the language barrier. One of the first things that these scientists and Navy personnel on board found out was the name of this strange alien creature. But they didn't call them Njeri. Instead, they simplified it to the human name, Jerry. But the Banu didn't seem to mind, adapting to the name quite quickly. Sokovich brought Tarr on board his ship as well, to get the full details. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Vernon Tarr told the general everything, leaving nothing out. Equally realizing how much of a monstrous screw-up Tarr had made, the general convinced the explorers to not mention to anyone that he nearly killed the first representative to come in contact with humanity. These details would take centuries to come out to the general public. However, what word did come out was that the UNE had made first contact with an alien civilization, and further military forces and the press descended upon the Davian system. While Tarr was basking in the celebrity glow of being the first human to make first contact, Jerry, on the other hand, was hard at work. He was proving to be very helpful to the teams on board. And over the next 2 weeks, Jerry talked with the scientists and the general to try to learn more about one another. Probably the most famous incident during this time was when scientists presented a plate of various foods for Jerry to eat, to which he promptly ate all of the food, non-biodegradable wrappers included. This was the first time scientists realized just how strong a palate that the Banu actually have. In July of that month, a much larger Banu fleet arrived in the Davian system. While they were likely looking for the outlaw Banu, instead they found a brand new species eager to talk with them. General Sokovich's renowned patience was key in not only the two sides deciphering each other's languages, but in understanding one another's culture. He was truly the right person in the right place at the right time. Jerry eagerly helped both sides try to bridge the gap between the two cultures. And as Jerry learned more and more things about humanity, the more the Banu became fascinated by all things human. By October, both sides had made a breakthrough, and General Sokovich was chosen to lead the official delegation for the UNE, with his opposite being a trade representative from the Protectorate. Due to the expert political tact of General Sokovich, both sides were able to reach quite a common ground very quickly, and by the end of October, both sides had come to an agreement, and the UNE ratified what's known as the First Interstellar Peace and Trade Accord. This was a treaty of trade, specifically to open up Banu and human markets to one another to allow for an equal exchange of goods and services. This would mark the end of First Contact and the beginning of the longest and most fruitful relationship that humanity has ever had with an alien species. A trade agreement that's renegotiated quite frequently, but is still around, almost unchanged, for almost 600 years. After this, each of the important people in this story moved on with their lives. General Neil Sokovich would retire in 2441, where he purchased a plot of land on his home planet of Angeli and entered the winemaking business. We don't know what happened to Vernon Tarr, but we know he was hailed as the hero of First Contact for many years, and likely retired as that sometime after, as he drops off the record after First Contact. Jerry would have a rougher go. They were forgiven of their crimes by their Suli and allowed to return, but they were never trusted. They had thought that they would return a hero, but became a pariah for their former actions. After finishing their contract with their old Suli, they tried forming their own human relations Suli, but failed to land any contracts. With their fortunes failing, they returned to Davian to find that they were a celebrity in human space. Jerry learned Common and traveled widely across the budding UNE to give talks on Banu life and culture, and on November 2nd, 2456, surrounded by human and Banu friends, Jerry passed away in their home in the Davian system, forgotten by the Banu, but beloved by the people whom they had helped bring into the wider galactic stage. First Contact sent ripples throughout the UNE and human society as a whole, affecting all of human history. It sparked more explorers to try and find faster routes to Banu space, and being one of the key factors in expanding Project Farstar, a critical exploration initiative which would eventually lead humanity to both the Xi'an and the Vandul. This also was a wake-up call for the UNE military because of just how close they came to openly shooting an alien species. Knowing that they got lucky with the Banu, they needed to prepare themselves for the possibility of encountering a hostile alien race in the future. They would begin the process of modernizing the woefully unprepared military, which would lead to the founding of Hurston Dynamics, Aegis Dynamics, and Bearing Applied Technology, all of which would come to dominate military-industrial complex and set the standard for modern ships, weaponry, and armor of humanity. It also started the process of merging the Banu and human cultures, with the first Luminalia with humans being celebrated at the end of negotiations. This Banu holiday would then sweep through human space and become an integral part of human culture, and as a result, the Banu would standardize this date for celebration as a sign of solidarity with their human neighbors. While it wasn't the smoothest of first contacts, it set in motion many events which were to come later, sending humanity down the winding patch of interstellar diplomacy and internal change which have come to dominate the modern UEE. All because of an outlaw bureaucrat, a trigger-happy explorer, and one hell of a military negotiator. I'd like to thank you for watching, and I'd like to thank those on screen now for supporting the channel financially. If you want to throw in a few credits, think about becoming a member on YouTube. And if you want a bit more for your contribution, join the Patreon. Patreons get early, ad-free access to all videos, including exclusive early access to my long-running Complete History of Star Citizen lore series, whose 3 episodes are available for the public now. The 4th episode is currently being worked on, but it's going to take a little time. If you want to know what you're getting, check out the playlist of all of those episodes in the top right. Now I want to hear your thoughts on First Contact and any other lore topics in the comments.